Greetings, Pastor Ron Jetter, Immanuel Lutheran Church, Grandview, Washington. Today is Tuesday, April 21st, the 10th day in the season of Easter, Easter being the first day. That means we're 25% of the way through with the season from Easter to the Ascension of Jesus. 1/4 of the classroom time for the disciples is now gone. The first quarter of the 4-quarter learning season, each of those being only 10 days long, is already past. They don't get a spring break. It's an intensive 40-day course. And they get all the credit they need to then receive the Great Commission, which we'll hear about later. Or 20% between Easter and the festival of the Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit comes down and gives the disciples or the ability to become apostles. Disciple meaning student, apostle meaning sent ones who are sent to make students, to make disciples. Yesterday I began looking at Mark, the shortest of the Gospels, and the outline for what we call the Synoptic Gospels. Synoptic meaning similar in outline. Matthew was probably written 15 years after Mark's Gospel, around the time of Luke's Gospel as well. Matthew, though, has the distinction of being one of the 12. But Matthew himself would be very, very old. Likely Matthew was written by his students. After all, Jesus said, "Go there and therefore and make disciples." Well, that's what Matthew did. He went and made disciples, and his disciples heard his story to the point where they could teach it as though it were their own. And through faith in Jesus, it had become their story. That's the whole point of the good news, is that in hearing it and taking that into our hearts and our mind and our soul, it becomes our story, our good news, the good news according to Ron, the good news according to you. Each of us have our version of it. Why do Matthew, Mark, and Luke have so much in common? Well, Matthew and Luke followed Mark's outline, the basic calendar of events, that 3-year calendar of events in Jesus' adult life, from the baptism by John through the crucifixion and resurrection. But Matthew adds on the ascension, as does Luke. Mark doesn't. Matthew has his starting, which is when Jesus was, actually before Jesus was born. I'll get to that in a minute. And Luke will have his beginning, which we'll talk about tomorrow. Matthew and Luke go much farther back. Mark, it starts with Jesus already an adult and only concerns Jesus' 3-year ministry. Luke, as we'll find out tomorrow, doesn't simply want to end the good news with the ascension of Jesus. He adds a sequel onto it, which we call the book of the Acts of the Apostles, or Luke Acts, the 2-volume work. Matthew's students, though, putting together Matthew's gospel, had access to more than Mark did, or at least Mark chose not to use it. It's a collection of sayings that also appears in Luke, and because they're common to Matthew and Luke, these are known as Q or quell, for the meaning the word source. It's a saying source. How does Matthew begin? Well, with these words. And once again, I have to always re-enter that password on my iPad. The genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, chapter 1, verse 1 of Matthew. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac the father of Jacob. Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah the father, and so on. And it goes through the lineage of Judah. It doesn't list all the 12 sons of Jacob. It only lists Judah, because remember, Judah was the tribe that survived. All 12 tribes came out of Egypt during the Exodus. But after settling in the land, the tribes were united under 3 kings. And when King Solomon died, the northern 10 called themselves Israel. The southern 2, Judah and tiny little Benjamin, simply called themselves Judah. They didn't call themselves Judah-Benjamin. Benjamin, you want to hang with us? Great. But we're Judah. We're Judah together. And because Judah then survived when Israel was destroyed, all Jews today are really Judahites, which is where the word Jew comes from. They're from Judah. That's their distinction. So Matthew's only concerned with the tribe of Judah, the descendants of Judah, but he goes clear back to Judah's great-grandfather, Abraham. That's when God called Abraham to be the father of the chosen people. That's Jesus' beginning. Matthew, a Jew, wants to show his fellow and sister Jews, Jesus is one of us. He's our Messiah. He's the one we hoped for, the one we waited for, the one our prophets foretold, whom we, through our own sinfulness and our own corruption, handed over to the Romans to be crucified, whom God then raised. And so that's Matthew's beginning, all the way back. Now, Matthew does have Jesus as a child. He talks about how the Holy Spirit had come to Mary and how Mary was going to have a child, and when Mary reveals this to Joseph, Joseph's very troubled by that. So we have the angel then visiting Joseph saying, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife and to raise Jesus as your son. The world would not know Jesus was anyone else's son. It was Joseph and Mary's son. That's Matthew's beginning, showing that Jesus was raised as a typical Jewish child in the region of Judea. That's right. Judea, not Nazareth in Galilee. That comes in Luke. Why the difference? And how does Jesus get to Galilee? Well, in Matthew's gospel, these three sages from the east, the Magi, actually there's not three, it simply says Magi brought gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Okay, 3 gifts, 3 Magi, and that's how traditions develop. But the Bible doesn't say that there were 3. It simply uses the word plural, 2 or more. It may have been 30 or 40, a traveling group of sages, of astrologers who seek the stars and watch the signs. They came to King Herod and says, where is the one foretold to be the king of your land? And Herod said, I don't know, but I need to worship him too. Will you please go and find him and then come back and tell me? Well, they did go and find Jesus. And when Herod got word, of course, that there was another claimant for the throne, he immediately sent out his army, and that story, that horrible story known as the slaughter of the innocents, killing any young child that could possibly be this newborn Messiah. Joseph and Mary had been warned in a dream, flee to Egypt. And then after staying in Egypt perhaps up to 2 years, they came back and realized it still wasn't safe, so then they go to Nazareth in Galilee. That's how Matthew's story gets them to Galilee. We'll find out tomorrow how Luke's story does it, and it is different. Why? Why don't the Gospels tell the same story? Well, I've been to a few games over at CenturyLink Field, and it's fun. I go with friends, and when the friends were sitting around afterward, we may stop in a restaurant or something on the way home. We have a favorite place in Issaquah where we like to stop. And we'll be eating our lunch and quaffing our suds and rehashing the game. Did you see the play? It's a rhetorical question. Of course I saw the play. I was right there with you. Do you remember when he reached up and of course it was. But each of us, if asked, what was your favorite play? Now, if it was a really amazing play, we would go, that one. That was the best play of the game. Okay, what was your second best? Well, that's when the answers are going to vary. Or maybe you go to performances, a ballet, the opera, a Broadway play. We love going to plays. Our kids were in drama. Sue and I have been in drama. I've been on stage, behind stage. We've seen as many Broadway plays as we could when our daughter was there. We got to see Hamilton, Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, Schoolhouse Rock, so many other wonderful plays. And if you asked us what was the best part of the play, Well, in Hamilton, I loved when King George III comes out and does his wonderful little light ditties, making fun of the whole American experiment. Was that my favorite? I don't know, maybe. What's my favorite song? Well, that's a good question. If you asked my wife, my daughter, me, or others who have seen it, what was your favorite part of Hamilton? Well, I don't know, but what was the favorite thing about being at Hamilton? Being at Hamilton! We would all agree on the main thing. Matthew, Mark, and John Matthew, Mark, and Luke all agree. Jesus is God's Son in human flesh, sent here to redeem the human race. Crucified, died, buried, rising, ascending, teaching, commanding, commissioning. They all agree. That's the heart of the story. As I said yesterday, those 3 days, the Triduum, Monday, Thursday to Easter Sunday, that's the heart of the story. All the writers start there and work their way back to where they get to the beginning and then come back. And that's Matthew's gospel. Today, then, we give thanks for the Jewish gospel of Matthew, that Jesus is the foretold chosen one, the Messiah. Thanks for listening. Tomorrow there is a 4 p.m. Zoom Bible study, and the invitation will be sent out to all those in the Immanuel Lutheran Church member and guest email list to do a live Zoom Bible study 4 p.m. There won't be a devotional that day. Join at 4 if you're able to.